Don't look now, but Joey Porter Jr. and Cory Trice Jr. are both turning heads at the cornerback position in OTAs. I'm Christopher Carter, host of your Locked On Steelers podcast. We're going to talk about that and more about the secondary. It's going to be a fun episode. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting app and especially on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all your daily Monday through Friday episodes as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. Now, before we get going, I want to remind everyone, or I want to just state, I apologize for Jenna Harner not being here. She had some important things to do with the Penguins hiring a new president and everything. So if you want to hear more about that, go to Channel 11 where she did a lot of great reporting on that, or listen to Locked On Penguins with Hunter Honies, who did a great job covering it there as well. We have a Locked On Penguins show just like we have Locked On Everything. But I want to talk to you guys about some of the conversations I've had in the Steelers locker room during OTAs, and I've been very intrigued to see how the rookie cornerbacks are doing. Because remember, it's not just Joey Porter Jr., it's also Cory Trice Jr., and Cory Trice is not going to have nearly as much on him, but if both are able to develop into starting cornerbacks for the Steelers, it gives them two 6'3" physical guys on the outside who could be there for the long term and could be big, important pieces for the Steelers moving forward. But the question is, how are they going in? And we know OTAs aren't everything. It's still just football in shorts, and they're not fully doing everything, but the veterans are getting to see how smart these guys are, how they're taking on assignments, how they're taking on instruction, how they're taking in the game and the process of which they're doing it, how they're filling in their assignments and being in the right places. And so far, seems like guys have their heads on straight. Patrick Peterson even praised Joey Porter Jr. This past week. He talked to the media saying that, hey, you know what? He's like, Patrick Peterson, he's probably going to be lining up in a bunch of different spots. But he said Joey Porter Jr. has been playing on first, second, and third teams. Anywhere you put him, he seems comfortable. And he expressed confidence in the rookie. And I got a chance to talk to Joey Porter Jr. this week. And my leadoff question was a question about listening to the right messages. Because when you're the athlete or the son of a famous athlete and you're becoming a professional athlete, and of course he's Joey Porter Sr.'s son, you're going to get a lot of advice from a lot of different directions, and that can be challenging because sometimes you may get conflicting advice. You may get challenged, things that you're like, I'm not sure what to listen to here because everybody's trying to be in your ear. So I wanted to ask him this question, not for the sense of just simply saying yes or no, but to see how he responded to it. I think it was an interesting response because he sat there and thought about it and gave a good answer to that, as well as a few other questions that myself and Jenna Harner threw at Joey Porter Jr. Here he was in the Steelers locker room after OTAs earlier this week. I want to be your mentors.
No, not really, because they're all trying to give me the good message, the good insight on the game, and really just learn. So every time somebody new come up to me, I try to take that with a grain of salt and just keep moving forward.
What's Patrick Peterson been like so far in the first few practices you guys have?
Man, he's been great. He just really took me in under his wing and just telling me the ropes, showing me the ropes, and I'm glad to have him on my squad because without him, I wouldn't be able to learn so much about the game so fast like I am right now.
You've been, your style of play, whenever I watch you, you're very aggressive. You like to get in people's faces, use your hand, play aggressive style. Is there a way that you have to kind of approach learning, kind of relearning how to be aggressive in the NFL versus college?
Not really. There's some little things that I can do, like after 5 yards, you can't touch the guy at all. So compared to college, so just me and Coach Grady just really been going over that, going through some of my old tapes, going through the tapes I've been through now at practice, and seeing the difference of how I play the game. And I feel like we're learning pretty quickly. So I'm good right now.
I know it's still pretty early, but just how has the adjustment process been? How do you feel like you've been getting up to speed with the NFL?
I mean, it's great. The first 2 days were kind of tough, really just getting the hang of it, the speed, the pace, and really just knowing the defense. But now since it's like my 5th, 6th day out here, it's been really good. I'm kind of know what I'm doing a little bit more, communicating more, so it's been great.
So part of that there, one, the praise for Patrick Peterson as a mentor and what he's doing for him there, but you also hear him talking about the natural progression of things. And I think it's important to note, that hey, yeah, he's feeling more comfortable, and comfort isn't necessarily feeling like things are easy, but making sure that you're not thinking as much to do the more instinctual things you need to do in coverage. So many of the things that the Steelers have done well in their best years when they've had the best defenses is their communication and their ability to just rotate between switches without having to say too much or do too much, and there not being too much fuss between guys in the secondary. And that's a challenge. It's not easy. It's something that takes time, but part of it is getting it down early in the year, especially for rookies, so that that's less of a question when they get to training camp. And the more questions they have are just getting used to NFL speed, NFL talent, because that's a huge thing to adjust for. Go back to TJ Watt's rookie year, and you can remember some of the adjustments he had to make in his time. And he had some really good moments as a rookie, but you could see the rookie factor in him, and you're going to see the rookie factor in Joey Porter Jr. I don't think that just because people are saying good things about him and he's saying the smart things, and I think those were all really good answers, I don't think that guarantees that he's going to not hit some rookie adversity there. But I also think that between him and Cory Trice, both of them seem to be handling things well. And I think part of it is the nature of the Steelers secondary as it is. Here was Cory Trice talking about his progress and where he's fitting in with things on the same day when I talked to him earlier this week at Steelers OTAs. You play like a physical style of
right.
How do you adjust that to the NFL with the rules and the things you got to do with different types of players as well?
Yeah, so really just knowing when to do it. So I gotta make sure that I get hands on within 5 yards at the press line of scrimmage. And then after that, I gotta get my hands off. So you really just trying to win early on and down. Win early on in the rep, and then like getting my hands off and just running with guys.
What's Patrick Peterson like as a mentor?
He's a good guy, man. Anything I ask him, he always put me in the right direction. He always looking out. Anything I ask him, he always willing to answer the question. So he definitely a good guy.
What's Joey like as a teammate and a fellow rookie?
Great guy, man. We all trying to get better. We all trying to work. So, every day, me and him ask each other questions. Sometimes we quiz each other, make sure we know the plays. And now we just go out there trying to, keep getting better, making plays.
Did you start to haze y'all yet at all? Like playing rookie jokes on you?
Oh, no, man. Nah, not yet. I heard it's coming, but not yet, man. Everybody around just good people, so.
So the last question, if you couldn't hear, I was asking if Cory Trice had been, if him and Joey Porter had been hazed a little bit yet, because I was intrigued just to see, what was that vibe like? Because Steelers, they, it's part of the tradition, young guys, they got to carry the bags, they got to do all the stuff. And he said, nothing yet. But I went to ask Kevin Dotson the same question about Broderick Jones. And he was just like, a little bit of things here and there, not anything major. And then I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And I turn around and Broderick Jones is carrying all of the linemen's helmets. And there are like 10 of them. And so he's just like, I am tired of this. He puts them down. He's like, y'all sort them out. I am done. And he was so frustrated with carrying those helmets. And so that's the little things. And you see the older lineman kind of chuckle and laugh. Part of the Steelers camaraderie that they do there to kind of bring in the rookies each year. But back to Trice and Porter. One thing that Trice also said that I didn't get to squish into our questions there, because I have to keep these videos kind of condensed to make it work with StreamYard. But one of the things that he also talked about is that the coaches are focusing with him on his jamming technique and getting in and out of his breaks and making sure that he is staying in the hip pocket, in the right spots, maintaining that leverage. And I think that's going to be a huge factor here in the growth of both him and Joey Porter Jr. Both are physical, long cornerbacks with long arms that like to get on opponents and like to redirect them. But it's not just being physical and being aggressive. It's being timely with it. It's having technique. It's knowing your leverage and knowing how to play with that leverage in different situations. And these are the things that are going to come with being a rookie. But I think if these guys are receptive to what the Steelers are coaching and what the veterans are trying to teach, it's going to go a long way with this secondary. And I want to talk more about that secondary in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, so don't go anywhere. I'm your host, Chris Carter. But first, before we do any of that, I want to talk to you guys about our great sponsors at FanDuel Sportsbook. Of course, FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America right now. And if you haven't gotten on board, this is a big chance for you with the NBA Finals going on, because they're giving new customers a no-sweat first bet now up to $2,500 you can get back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. on FanDuel.com. And if to sign up for this, just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you can sign up to claim your no sweat first bet. You can bet on will Nikola Jokic just get another triple double. He seems to always do it. Who will win the series? Looking like the Nuggets after game one. Will Jimmy Butler win the Finals MVP? Maybe if the Heat somehow pull it off. But all those things you can bet on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Don't miss your shot at a no sweat first bet up to $2,500 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's continue our discussion here about the secondary. Now, we heard from both Joey Porter Jr. and Cory Trice Jr. and how they're fitting in and what they're being taught and how Patrick Peterson is for them. And I think it poses an interesting conversation that I also expand upon with a bit on another show that I do, Brian Batko and I, for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We talked about this in the North Shore Drive podcast. So if you don't always buy into my perspectives and you'd like to hear some other things, listen to Brian Batko. We had an interesting discussion on that for the Friday episode of the North Shore Drive podcast. You can find that just by searching for it or looking for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's YouTube page or podcast page. But I think that the interesting part of the interesting potential, for this cornerback room is you have reliable veterans who are good at getting their hands on the football in Patrick Peterson and Levi Wallace. But both Trice and Porter are guys who can be physical, guys who are long, who have long arms. They have the right size. They're guys that can fit in there. If Joey Porter Jr. is the guy, if it can be the guy that's just plugged in on the outside. Patrick Peterson also acknowledged, hey, the Steelers are talking to him about putting him in different spots, and that maybe the slot, that maybe kind of like an off-ball extra position, maybe safety, maybe something like that. Though, if you listen to Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings, he posted the Breaking Bad meme when he was like, "Don't say it, don't do it," because the Minnesota Vikings tried that with Patrick Peterson and it supposedly didn't work. But I do think that there's the chance to move Patrick Peterson around and have him be in more positions where it requires communication. Whereas if you play on the outside, and I talk about this with Brian Batko on our show, but if you play on the outside a little bit more, you can kind of be reliant on, hey, this is the sideline. I have deep thirds. I have deep half, these quarters, whatever it is. This is my primary responsibility. I don't necessarily have to worry about checking to see, okay, where's the slot right now in this formation? If he goes inside, I have to kind of trail and lead him into a linebacker. Or if he goes inside and the linebackers are blitzing, do I have to maintain inside leverage and hope for backside help? Things like that you have to consider. And I think that's where Patrick Peterson may come in handy. And maybe the Steelers don't roll with a Chandon Sullivan at slot corner as much. I still think he gets on the field, of course, but I think that they're going to use a lot of different looks here. But if Joey Porter Jr., and I want to leave Cory Trice time to develop because it takes time for all of them to develop, but Joey Porter Jr. was picked 32nd overall. On a normal year, that's a first-round pick, and you'd expect a first-round pick to be starting in year one. Now, I think it could be interesting just to see how do the Steelers want to deploy this to get their top three cornerbacks on the field, and that includes Patrick Peterson, they signed in free agency, Levi Wallace, who had a solid year last year in his first year with the Steelers, and Joey Porter Jr., who they picked at the top of the second round as the cornerback who could be the leader of this secondary in the coming future. And if Joey Porter Jr. is able to do the things that they're talking about doing, Patrick Peterson talking about him being a starter, he played on all first, second, and third string teams, and he looked solid and comfortable in each of those roles. I think that you might be in a position where this Steelers secondary could be the key to putting this whole piece together to make this an elite defense. Now, we talked earlier this week about them being top 5. And they have to be very good for them to be top 5. They can't be giving up big pass plays. They do have to be getting turnovers. And I think that when you're looking at this group, and we've talked about this earlier, turnovers and interceptions are of prime concern for the Steelers moving forward. They know the days are gone of getting 3 and outs all the time and just trusting that and trusting that your defense to keep holding in that way. You need big plays. You need opportunities for when for your defense to create moments for your offense, to get those turnovers, to get the short field, and to have points of the game where you can change the game in your favor. That was when the Steelers were at their best last year, was when they were creating turnovers. And if the Steelers do the things up front that we expect them to, the pass rush returning to true form and being one of the best in the NFL with TJ Watt, if he can be back for a full healthy season, Alex Highsmith coming along, Larry Ogunjobi, Cam Hayward still doing their thing, and you have all the other guys filling in those spots. If the run defense stays in the top 10 the way it did last year, and they've invested more in the defensive line and some new linebackers to come in there and help, then it really could just come down to how well do these cornerbacks play. And if Joey Porter Jr. is being the guy that people are talking about, that Patrick Peterson feels strong about, that Joey Porter Jr. is talking about, like how he's learning and the things that he's being pressed to do and the challenge that he faces right now in OTAs, I think it puts the Steelers in a very good position. Now, the question, and a lot of people have, is about Jamar Chase and other top wide receivers that this team is going to face. The Steelers, I think, have shown over the years that they have the guys who can help in that situation. If you remember Devontae Adams with the Las Vegas Raiders, there was a lot of hoopla, even on this very show, about, man, how are they going to stop that guy? Because he is one of the best receivers in the NFL, and he does not play around. And then somehow they shut him down for pretty much the entire Raiders game. And it was a team effort, it was communication, but the communication was the biggest part of that shutdown. It wasn't that Cam Sutton was just on an island and it's just like, it's me and you, Devontae. It was, hey, pass him off to this guy, double him here, disguise how we're doubling him there. And I even asked like Devontae KZ about that, and he was just like, I remember asking him this specifically. I was like, was this the same plan that you used against so-and-so? And he was like, no, we're not giving that up. We're not talking about what our plans are, because they're protecting them. But it is clear that with Terrell Austin, the current defensive coordinator, who used to be the DB's coach for the Steelers, Grady Brown, who's now the DB's coach for the Steelers, there's a lot of talk about the communication to disguise things and to take away certain players. And it's not just as simple as putting your best guy on him or lining up a safety over top. It's disguising where that help is going to come from. And I think that this secondary could be in good hands if the biggest thing that is taken away from these OTAs, from minicamp in a couple weeks, and from training camp, is that the young cornerbacks know where to be and how to play to that system. That will be the key, in my opinion, for getting this Steelers secondary on track, for making them one of the best units in the NFL, getting them in position to force interceptions. And again, just being in position is going to force quarterbacks to hold on to the ball longer, not allowing them to get off passes after 2 seconds, in just 2 seconds. And that's going to allow the pass rush more time to get home and do the damage that they do. And that's where you start putting together the pieces to be a great defense. But again, it comes down to the young guys learning the way the old guys have. And it also means the old guys got to learn too, because Patrick Peterson's new to the team. He's not Cam Sutton, who always played 5 different positions in the secondary for the Steelers. He's going to have to learn that. But I think that he has learned that. He can learn that because he's a Hall of Fame cornerback. I doubt that he got this far by not being a guy who can take on several different roles and know how to make those adjustments in a game and even lead making those adjustments with other people in a game. I think if the rookies, if they are being as sound as we're hearing, if they're understanding, if they're being comfortable with the switches, with the communication, and they're not having like these headaches or these big gaps where everyone's like, whoa, where did you go, buddy? That could be the key to this secondary clicking, because again, if they're just in position doing their thing, it won't rely on Joey Porter Jr. to make more interceptions in 1 year than he did in all of college, which granted, if he just did 2, that would be enough. But still, it wouldn't rely on him having to be a turnover machine. It wouldn't have to rely on Cory Trice being a turnover machine. It would rely on his defense being able to cause havoc and cause problems through their scheme. And I think that there is a scheme here that works as long as you don't give up the big play, as long as that you stick to it. And if these guys are sticking to it the way we're hearing, and when we're talking to these players, talking to them themselves, and of course the veterans in their same room and how they're studying, I think all signs point to that scheme being able to be have a solid impact on the Steelers' plans moving forward. But I think that there's still a weakness on this team, as well, specifically in this secondary. And it's not just about a specific position. Because I know a lot of people are going to say, well, slot corner, Chris. It's not just that. It's a specific matchup problem that I think could become a kryptonite to this defense if they're not careful. We'll talk about that here in a minute on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're continuing our discussion here on the Steelers secondary on our Friday episode here. Now, I want to give credit to someone who brought this up in our YouTube comments. And I don't always read our YouTube comments because I'm a busy guy, and YouTube comments, y'all be going off sometimes, and I can't always deal with it. But a guy, actually, I don't know if they're a guy, but a person, well, I guess they're a guy because they say 03man11. I give you credit for this. If you're watching this show, know that you're getting your shout out for this question. He said, unpopular opinion. The 2023 versions of KZ and Neal are not Edmunds, and we will get cooked by the likes of Kittle and Andrews. Now, of course, the Steelers play Mark Andrews and the Ravens twice, and they play George Kittle and the Niners once. And there's going to be some tight end challenges on this schedule this year, and that is a very good point. And I think part of it is when he said that those guys aren't Edmunds. DeMonte KZ and Keanu Neal, they do certain things well, but they don't have the build or the total composition of a Terrell Edmunds. And hear me out here, because I know some people would say, well, Chris, who cares? Terrell Edmunds didn't get interceptions. Terrell Edmunds didn't have to get interceptions because of what he did for the defense. He was a guy who was kind of, as I always, he kind of cleaned up everything. He was kind of a janitor in the secondary because he erased problems, or I guess an eraser would be the better term there, because matchup problems used to be such a big issue for the Steelers. Tight ends would eat them alive. And then when Terrell Edmunds came in, tight ends could sometimes have really good days, but it wasn't this primary concern of just that was your biggest weakness all the time. DeMonte KZ's 5'11", Keanu Neal's 6'0". Terrell Edmunds is 6'1" and moves not just in a straight line fast, but he changes direction fast. He did a lot of different things that made it tough for tight ends to just get open and dominate games against the Steelers. And sometimes they did. It happens. Sometimes Darrelle Revis gets beat. But Terrell Edmunds was an important part of that secondary because he could line up with tight ends and slot receivers and outside receivers and running backs and give you pretty solid coverage where he creates a small passing window for you to fit the ball into. And that's not to say that KZ nor Neal can do that job themselves. But that might not be their forte. And if it isn't their forte, if it is a weakness of theirs against bigger tight ends in the NFL that are also athletic, it could become the kryptonite that people might be worrying about for the Pittsburgh Steelers defense this year. As much as we're talking about the excitement for the young pieces, the veterans they've brought in, the veterans that are still in Pittsburgh, this could be the thing that could be something tough on this defense. Now, here's the other thing. And all the communication parts that I just mentioned in the second segment, there are ways to work around that. And if you remember, like back when the Steelers were getting chewed up by tight ends, there was also the fact that just those secondaries just weren't highly invested into back then. Robert Golden was a starter. Antoine Blake was a starter. Mike Mitchell was a starter. Artie Burns was a starter. Like those were the years when the Steelers would just get eaten up by tight ends because their guys weren't the best communicators. They couldn't disguise as much. And if you followed me back then when I would do like my film analysis and stuff on that, one of my big emphasis was just that they didn't have disguised coverages back then. And I think that that's something that people overlooked a little bit until you went back and watched the All-22. And it was when they started to get some disguised coverages, and the thing was the tail end of the 2017 season, I want to say. They started to have some pieces there, but then when Ryan Shazier got hurt, a lot of that kind of went to flu because he was a huge part of setting up those disguises, and they kind of had to go back to base looks, and that got them eaten up quite a lot at the end of the year in 2017, hence them getting picked apart by Blake Bortles and Leonard Fournette and what was a top 5 offense that year, but still still an embarrassing performance by a defense that lacked a talented secondary. This secondary isn't that secondary, even though Patrick Peterson isn't in his prime, even though Levi Wallace isn't the fastest cornerback out there, even though Keanu Neal's coming off of free agency, and Demonte KZ only played half the season last year. All these guys are solid veterans who, if nothing else, they know where to be, they know how to take orders, they know how to take communication and work with their partners. These aren't guys that you're bargaining shopping for off of practice squads. And if Joey Porter Jr. is the guy you're hoping that he is, and this is a person that they definitely targeted, he's a different situation than Artie Burns. Artie Burns was a person that, because of how the board fell in front of them with what William Jackson III, the Steelers took him because they knew they needed a cornerback, and it didn't work out. Joey Porter Jr., they took in the second round because he fell to the second round, and they were just like, wow, we had this guy graded as a first-round guy. This worked out perfectly. And again, you combine with Patrick Peterson, you combine it with Levi Wallace, and even the safeties, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Demonte KZ. I can't speak for Keanu Neal yet because I haven't seen enough of him in action, but all those guys I've seen in Steelers uniform, minus Patrick Peterson, of course, all those guys I've seen, they're communicators. They're guys who are on the field who can be in the right spot at the right time, and not all the time. There's times Minkah got beat. But this could be a defense that works around that. And we go back to that tight end problem and how that could be a weakness. There might be not a one-on-one solution, but there might be ways to mitigate that with the concepts that Terrell Austin's going to draw up. And I think that's one of the biggest differences in the Steelers defense moving forward compared to the years like under Keith Butler. Because Keith Butler was a linebackers coach for many years. He kind of just ran forward with the Dick LeBeau philosophies, carried those on. That was kind of his thing. Getting after the quarterback was still important. Stuffing the run was still important. But the Steelers needed help on the back end of the defense, creating those disguise coverages, creating those concepts that are going to confuse quarterbacks and get your cornerbacks and your safeties in opportunities to make plays in the football, to create turnovers. I think all of this plays a big part in that. And part of that could also be setting up those baits to those tight end teams, because, we talk about how, you talk about George Kittle. Okay, cool. But it's not like the Niners have the most prolific passing game in the NFL. Brock Purdy, who seems to be doing well with his recovery, might be the starter next year, which means you'll get a second-year player who didn't even start a full season, and he might be rusty coming off his injury. There's opportunities there. It's not like you're going up against a well-oiled machine there. And I think that if the Steelers are able to accomplish that with the communication that we're talking about, that if Joey Porter Jr. and Cory Trice Jr. are both feeling that confidence in the calls, in the adjustments, in what they have to do, I think it'll go a long way to what the Steelers are going to try to do. I think it'll actually help them mitigate what could be their biggest weakness, which is just finding matchups for tight ends. And those communication skills could be put to good work to make this defense a confusing unit for quarterbacks to figure out, which is a huge part. And I think maybe one of the more understated parts of some of the best defenses out there. It's not just how hard they hit. It's not just how many superstars they have. It's how many players they have that can stick to the plan and have the plan be something that can fool your opponents. Outthink them, outsmart them, outmaneuver them. And I do think the Steelers have the veterans, and maybe from the sounds of it, maybe even the rookies, to pull that off. This has been the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Thanks again for checking us out here on your favorite podcasting app, and especially on YouTube. Thanks again for checking us out. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you again for everyone who checks out the show. Rate us 5 stars with a positive review on Apple Podcasts. You get a shout out at the end of the show. And as always, if you have any money or anything that you can to donate, we are raising money for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. If you want to help us out, use the link on screen that I have going to the campaign that I've been running. You can also use the QR code. Anything you donate is appreciated. And if you donate $10 or more, along with a phone call to 412-223-6644, you can get your phone call answered here right on the show and get your shout out on the show. within a week of your donation. So thanks again to everyone who has donated already, and thanks again to everyone who checks out the show. Again, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Listen to our podcast at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette with the North Shore Drive podcast and all the content we do there. And you can find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast Monday through Friday, breaking things down on your Pittsburgh Steelers. Have a great weekend, everyone. We'll be back Monday with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.